Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just sort of giving the system a little bit of time as people continue to log in. So it'll just be another minute or two. It's definitely slowing down. Okay, so I think we're going to get started, and oh, we're increasing again. Okay. So I think we'll get started, and I'll begin by, first of all, thanking you for tuning in today. And I really appreciate this opportunity to have a sort of direct face-to-face conversation, if you will, in the way that we have these face-to-face conversations today, which is via Zoom. We are recording the meeting. In the event individuals were unable to attend, they can certainly play it back or parts of it, if that would be helpful to them. So I'm here with Laurie Smith, Kim Boyd, Mr. Alabak, Mr. Ganesh, and Ms. Widener. And as a team, we want to be able to field your questions as they come in. So part of my purpose today is really to inform you as to where we are in our thinking as a district and what it is we're envisioning today for fall of 2021. And as I'm sure you're aware, the data are changing and some of that thinking changes with it. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I want you to know that you can access through the chat feature, if I have this right, a link that Mr. Ganesh posted, and I have it on the screen now. And you can use that link to access a Google form and jot down questions that you might have. And then the people that are also here on the webinar as panelists with me will field the questions and bring them to my attention. I want to try and answer as many as possible. And I will call out that Meg Lewis is on the call today. And I did ask her in advance if she would be comfortable fielding some of the health and safety questions. She's been a real help to me and the task force with some of the expertise she brings to the table. So I really appreciate Meg's willingness to do that. So if we get some questions in that category, she can help us out. Okay, so these are the points of interest that I thought you might have and I want to speak to. You may have some additional ones and I'm happy to hear them. I want to make sure that as many as are possible of your questions get answered actually do by the conclusion. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this phased school reopening health and safety plan that we've talked a little bit about at the board level. And I want to bring clarity to the purpose of that plan and what its intentions are as I view them. I also want to talk to you about some updated data and recommendations from the guiding agencies that we continually look to, and then some recommendations for instruction that we've been talking about. And I know that some of you in some different settings have been a part of conversations around all of these topics. So I regret that for some of you, there may be some redundancy. I hope that for the majority of you, this is important information, it's meaningful. So I sort of went over my purpose today, which is really to bring you up to date with the information as we know it today and share with you some of our thinking as we look to the start of the school year. So Pennsylvania Department of Education is requiring that all public schools develop a phased school reopening health and safety plan. And that plan needs to be approved by our Board of School Directors. It's on the agenda tonight. I'm not sure it will actually end up being approved tonight. However, it will be something that they discuss. Once the board approves the plan, and there really isn't a due date per our solicitor last week by which the plan needs to be approved, it then needs to go to PDE. It also needs to be posted on our website. And really the purpose of this plan is to help individuals to know whether we're in the yellow phase or the green phase, what health and safety guidelines will we uphold in our schools if we bring kids back? And I've put a link there to where you can get some additional information. So within this plan, just to highlight it a little bit more, there are 4 major categories, and they focus on cleaning, disinfecting, ventilating. That's the first category. Then they focus on, the information focuses on social distancing. And if you have students in the building, how will you organize them so that they maintain that social distance? The third category is really around monitoring the health and wellness of students and staff in the building, and that's where Meg has really played a leadership role for us. And lastly, there's sort of a catch-all category. It's called other considerations around having staff and students in the buildings. So if you've looked at the plan, it is posted in the public. There are some FAQs along with it in board docs, if you're interested, that help to bring clarity to the purpose of this plan. So this plan really focuses on the health and safety of students in our buildings and less on how we'll instruct if they're in our buildings. The one thing I want to call out about the plan is, while we have to submit the plan, and we certainly are permitted to open schools after July 1, which theoretically is the start of the new school year, how we actually instruct students is a local decision at this point. If we go back to March, the governor took over and he mandated the closures of schools. He has verbalized he doesn't think he'll do that again. Right now, that decision is ours, how we engage our kids in the learning, whether it's via that traditional model, which is the model we all know, or a hybrid. I'll talk a little bit more about that, or via virtual instruction, maybe some combination of those. That's left to our Board of School Directors and administration to decide. I wanted to also mention to you, I want to highlight this piece, which was developed by Meg Lewis and her team, her focus group, if you will, as part of the task force around monitoring student and staff health. So that's that third category in our PDE plan. And really the purpose of this Appendix A is to present a symptom monitoring questionnaire that we would ask all staff and expect students via their parents in some cases to answer before they report to school or before they board a school bus. And these are pretty common now in lots of working settings where individuals need to review their self-health and screen themselves for any of these symptoms: a fever of 100 or higher, cough, shortness of breath, you see the list there. Any of these symptoms have been connected to COVID-19. And if people experience any of these, they should not report to school or they should not report to work, is the idea. And if you're paying attention and happen to be following the board meetings, you may be aware that last week the athletics plan was approved that allows the school district to host voluntary practices for PIAA athletes. Voluntary, open practices. Nobody's obligated to attend. These practices are really aimed at conditioning or small group conditioning, skills, etc. Students will not be scrimmaging. They will not be in any kind of close contact. They will be social distanced. But before any of these athletes report to our school district or on campus, they are expected to complete this symptom monitoring questionnaire and make sure they don't have any of these symptoms that could be representative of COVID-19 or a flag that they may want to investigate further. Once individuals are exposed to a positive case or an individual that actually is symptomatic and has COVID-19, there's an algorithm that they follow. And this helps us to know what happens if somebody has positive symptoms. And you can see under Roman numeral 2, the steps an individual is expected to take. What happens if they receive a positive COVID test with symptoms? How do we as a school district respond to that? And this is based on the Department of Health guidelines, both the county and state levels. And Meg has been working closely with other nurses in the county and representatives from the health departments in developing this algorithm. So the temperature of 100 degrees, we went back and forth a little bit. Is it 100.0? Can it be 100.4? We've landed on 100 degrees. If somebody has a fever of 100 degrees, that's a flag. We want to investigate it further. 3 days or 72 hours with no fever, 10 days since symptoms, and you'll see further down, 14 days after the date of exposure for quarantines. So these specifics, these details of when individuals will be excluded from our school communities or able to return have been discussed in medical settings with individuals who lead some of our health agencies or participate in these nursing roles within our schools in Montgomery County. Now, I want to go back to also some additional information out of PDE. So, in addition to having to submit that plan about the health and safety guidelines we'll uphold in our schools, and again, for example, we're going to disinfect and clean at least twice a day, high touch areas. We're going to expect students and staff to wear masks. We're going to keep them socially distant when they're not wearing masks. Right now, the Montgomery County Office of Public Health is indicating if students are not wearing masks, they have to be at least 6 feet apart. That's the social distance mark that Montgomery County is using. If you're familiar with Bucks County, you may have read a 3 to 6 feet range that was acceptable. Dr. Arkush at Montgomery County is not comfortable going with a 3-foot social distance without a mask. So with a mask, there's a lot more flexibility. Without one, it's much more difficult. So that plan that we submit to PD really focuses on health and safety, some of the work that Meg led, et cetera. Beyond that plan and some of what the state expects, they have recently talked to us about attendance and hour requirements. We are obligated to meet 180 days, of instruction, or 900 hours at the elementary level, 990 hours at the secondary level. And under traditional circumstances, this has to be based on seat time, students at their desks, if you will, in classrooms on site. And we know that looking forward to the fall, that may not be feasible. And as we continue to monitor the data, it's certainly raising questions about bringing all students back in that traditional manner. So there is a section of the school code that actually provides flexibility to meeting these requirements, 180 days and the 900 or 990 hours, by being in classrooms on site. The state is now affording school districts flexibility in how they meet those time requirements. And that can be via virtual in addition to on-site. So that was a big help. And that came out last week or the week before. Actually, I believe it was last week. So our board will pass a resolution tonight, hopefully, that indicates there is an emergency situation. So it's a temporary provision that now allows the school district to accumulate the number of days and the number of hours via seat time in classrooms or virtually through virtual instruction. What the state also came out with is this order that all in-school settings must wear masks. Although I do want to mention there is a statement in this order, and I have a link here, and I'm happy to post this somewhere for you. There is a link here that takes you to the full language of this order, and it does afford individuals who are uncomfortable wearing a mask that they don't have to wear the mask, and they really don't need to have an excuse or a medical note, which I'm guessing has raised some questions for some of you, as it has for me. Masks seem to be one of the real mitigating steps that individuals can take to avoid the spread of the virus, which is why the order was handed down out of from the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Health. However, there is an opportunity for individuals to opt out of wearing a mask. So we would head into the fall, if we're bringing kids back into our classrooms as part of our health and safety plan that we're submitting to PDE, we expect them to wear masks. Another piece of information and order that was handed down from the state is that if you've traveled or you plan to travel to an area where there are high amounts of COVID-19 cases, it is recommended that you stay at home for 14 days. And we would want to support this recommendation with any staff in our district that may travel to, say, North Carolina. It's common that some of us go to North Carolina during the summer. Technically, if you do that, it is expected that you quarantine for 14 days. And that's based upon the current data around COVID-19 cases in that state and the other states that are listed here. Mr. Alabak can talk a little bit about the leaves that you'll have an opportunity to take, or how do we deal with a quarantine, and we can do that at some point in the presentation here. And as I'm talking about PDE and some of the directions and the information we're receiving from PDE, if I take you back to that plan, that phase school reopening health and safety plan template, in the beginning, there's a leading question. Based upon your county's current designation and your local community needs, which type of reopening has your school entity selected? And if you notice, last week I had the first one selected as well as a blended, thinking that there may be a possibility that we would open in a traditional manner for at least some of our students, and then maybe we would blend having some students on site some days and virtual other days. And I think that's represented here. I think that certainly is shifting for me, and I'll talk more about that. And that's in response to last week's data, not only in Pennsylvania, but really across the country and some other guiding agencies. So this is the only aspect really of the health and safety plan that directly connects to instruction. So there's not a lot of detail in this plan. People hear plan, and I'm guessing would certainly hope it would be all encompassing. It is not. It really focuses primarily on how you're going to keep kids safe and maintain a healthy school environment if you have individuals back in it. Yellow phase versus green phase. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the updated data. The American Academy of Pediatrics a few weeks ago was publishing a recommendation that kids need to be back in school. And we work very closely with kids on a regular basis and know that for many of them, this is the safest environment for them. This is where they get the healthiest of their meals. This is where they feel comfortable, and certainly learning happens for them. Well, last week, the American Academy of Pediatrics sort of walked back a little bit and is now asking schools to consider reopening in a way that's safe for all students. So they shifted in their recommendation a little bit based upon the data associated with COVID and some of the other scientific information I'm guessing they're basing their recommendations on. And they call out here, they base their recommendations on evidence and not politics. There are certainly some individuals in certain settings that are really pushing for us having our kids back in school. And I know that many of our parents would really prefer that. It supports them in actually earning their livelihood, being able to work, and having the school be the place where their children go during that time. Really, our decisions will be based upon the health and safety of all in the school community. And we certainly know that at least up to this time, that traditional model of schooling, the one we know best, is the one we also believe is most effective. We're in a place right now where we are reimagining and we're redesigning education. And that doesn't mean it can't be as strong as the education we know. We have to think differently moving forward based upon the evidence that we're being presented as part of this pandemic. So some of this information comes right from the New York Times. This was yesterday, and you can see that in Pennsylvania, they call out information and provide it for each of the states. There's an increase here as we move into July, and it certainly correlates to going green on June 26th or 25th. And we also see, this is a map also published in the New York Times that indicates the burden, if you will, on different areas within Pennsylvania. This is certainly Philadelphia down here. This is Montgomery County. And you can see relative to some of the other red circles on the map, Montgomery County, when you compare it to Philadelphia and some of the others, is still pretty large relative to some of these other areas where they're seeing a high number of COVID cases. This piece of information from the New York Times really talks about testing and how well states are doing with testing, or how they could improve with respect to testing. So testing is a big piece of helping to avoid the spread of this virus. If individuals know they're positive, even though they may be asymptomatic, they know then to quarantine and stay away from others. So these data actually speak to that. And this is just some detail about how some of the states are looking, the percentage of testing target met. So in the United States overall, it's 36. Pennsylvania is at about 66. You can see a positive test rate here, and then how many are hospitalized per 100,000 people. So again, more data for you, and it gives you a sense of how Pennsylvania compares. So it's a little bit further down the list to the other states. So still in need of some improvements in this area of testing. And now we get into Montgomery County specifically. So if you go to the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, you can pull up these data and they will inform you of how the cases look in the different municipalities of Montgomery County. So these data represent the deaths from individuals that have also had a verified positive test. So here's Skip Back, here's Trap, here's Lower Frederick, here's Perkiomen Township, and here's Schwenksville. So I left out Collegeville. But for the sake of example, you can see that some other areas in Montgomery County are much darker and have experienced the loss of more individuals. So right over here next to us, that's a pretty high number relative to some of the other ones you see in Upper Providence. So again, these data are on the Montgomery County website and help you to know how our area is being impacted by deaths due to COVID relative to other areas in Montgomery County. So I'm narrowing from the state, the country, the state, to the county. This came from the county site also, a count of new positive cases and the date they're reported. This takes us out to, I believe, July 11th. So we're starting to see maybe still sort of a downward trend overall. Questions about the upward. This is the 11th, and these are total deaths by date reported. And again, new deaths. And this is also 7/11. Much lower than where we were in April and May. So what are we thinking about with respect to instruction? And I'm anticipating this is probably the topic you're really most interested in. However, what we do in terms of instructing our students is really driven by the data connected to COVID-19 and what's happening with respect to the pandemic. And we've really been talking about 3 different modes of delivering instruction. The traditional mode, where I go back to that PDE plan. We have to uphold all the health and safety guidelines that we've incorporated into that plan once it's approved by our board and the state. The traditional mode is the mode we know best. Students report to school every day. They ride a bus, or they drive, or they get a ride with their parents, and they report to the classrooms, and they sit at their desks and move through that day in the traditional manner. The hybrid model is one that we've been talking about a little bit more, where we're describing that as a model where students would attend in the school building some days each week and participate in a virtual online setting the other days. And this would allow the district to decrease the number of students in a building on any given day by approximately half, which is certainly much more manageable in each of our classrooms to be able to uphold Those health and safety guidelines, we know, mitigate the spread of the disease. We also have the model that's purely virtual, where students participate from wherever they may be, either at home or at a babysitter's or in a child care center, 100% of the time. And right now we have PV virtual. We have a school, a virtual school, if you will. It's housed at the high school. Some students report to the high school and work in PV virtual, so they attend school in that virtual model. Others work from the comfort of their own home. Our goal would be, as you can see here, we're focused on expanding this option as we plan for the 2021 school year, anticipating families will prefer it, at least some families will prefer it, and we want to use our own staff to do that. So that's what we're looking at and exploring more. Most importantly, any of these options has to capture all students and afford them access to learning. So any of these modes needs to be viewed through an equity lens, and we want to make sure we don't lose anybody in the process. So you may have seen this slide. These are the possible modes as we think about them on a continuum, that traditional versus the hybrid versus the remote. And here's what we need to know. If we were to hypothetically start the school year in a traditional mode, and some of the districts around us have announced that we're going to go either traditional or we're going to go virtual. That's what we're offering. You know, our task force and I went out last Monday talking about a hybrid. There was a lot of support for a hybrid. However, I have questions about the possibility of a traditional for elementary and or middle school students. I'm really backing off of that after last week's data. I'm just not sure how that traditional is feasible and safe for all students. I don't know that we can uphold the safety and the health guidelines that are necessary to avoid zero spread of the virus. So lots of questions at this point continue around that traditional model, and are really gravitating towards that hybrid or virtual model as models that make more sense in keeping all safe and being able to offer a robust educational experience to our students. We could be in a position where we have to make a quick change regardless of how we start the year. And that's something we want to keep in mind. If we hypothetically start the year in a hybrid model, we may have to shift and be virtual. So I'm hoping that you're thinking about that too. So we want to be prepared and feel comfortable doing that if that's the case. So the traditional model, as I've talked about it a couple of times, I've mentioned some of these key points. Students will wear masks, we'll keep them socially distant. And again, if they're wearing masks, they can be closer than 6 feet. If they're not, for example, when they're eating in a cafeteria, they have to be 6 feet or more apart. And we would be really careful about bringing any large groups of students together. And certainly we'll still offer an option for students and families to participate remotely. That hybrid model is the one that's really the most complex, I think, because we've talked about some different versions of a hybrid. It's a combination of the traditional and the remote or the virtual learning. Flexibility for families. We would certainly make an effort to keep families on the same schedule if in the hybrid we bring students in 2 or 3 days a week and then lead them, engage them virtually the other days of the week. And we're talking about different schedules and different ways we would bring students together in a hybrid model. And we would certainly want to find ways to provide for continued collaboration and professional development of our staff as we embark upon, again, this redesign of offering school, of doing school. So the teaching and learning focus group, even though that's not a part of the plan, we created that focus group as part of our task force, and Mrs. Smith and Dr. Boyd and some others from her curriculum team led some of the work around different possibilities for hybrid learning as well as professional development. So in this particular case at the elementary level, maybe we divide students by their last name, and those with a last name that begins with the letters A through K attend Monday and Thursday, and those with the last name that begins with L through Z, Tuesday, Friday. And in this first line, the idea is that Wednesdays would be left open for the purpose of asynchronous learning, virtual learning for all kids, but it would be asynchronous versus synchronous if they're in a virtual setting, and some time for collaboration on the part of staff and some professional learning opportunities here. And then here we have remote learning, asynchronous, and I'm not sure why that calls out asynchronous actually. Maybe I'll ask Mrs. Smith to pipe in here.
Sure, it just basically indicates that you are face-to-face with A to K on Monday, but L to Z is learning asynchronously. So the initial model that we've looked at is more of a flipped classroom. We have entertained the idea of live streaming and haven't come to a conclusion on that, but this draft depicts half of your kids in front of you, face-to-face learning, and the other half doing learning, continuing in the curriculum, but in more of a flipped classroom model where they are receiving that instruction asynchronously.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And this is something very similar for the secondary level, so the same thing. And then, of course, that third mode, that third option for instructing our kids that we're thinking about is remote or virtual. We're using those terms synonymously. So virtual learning means all students learn from home or some other setting. They're not coming into our school buildings. And again, I mentioned that we have PV Virtual in our high school that offers a virtual learning or a remote learning experience to some students currently. We want to expand this, anticipating that there will be some families who will opt for this. We want to expand it to be led by our teachers, our staff. And certainly you can see the advantages to some. And I've heard from some families of interest in this particular mode because they have a nervousness coming back into the school community. There are lots of families that are interested in returning to school, at least according to the first survey. We're going to update the survey and administer an updated survey. There are lots that express they want to come back to that traditional setting. However, there are also a fair number that are nervous about coming back into the school setting, knowing what we know about the virus and how it spreads. So this is an example of a virtual learning. So if we're strictly virtual or remote, we would want to be more asynchronous and scheduled. And in some conversations with some of our staff, this seems to be appealing. And I think to parents, it will also be appealing. And to our students, it will hold them accountable and allow us to engage with them on more of a regular basis in ways that we know tend to support learning. And the same secondary, we have to think about how we lay out that synchronous schedule. But again, here's the point. If we move to a virtual model or remote learning, it will be more structured and it will be more robust. So there'll be more synchronous scheduling as part of that is the idea. So I've included the parent survey data here just so you get a sense. I went over this Monday, so I won't repeat myself too much. I want to entertain your questions. But people are worried about cleanliness in the buildings. We're focusing on protocols, updated protocols that really intensify some of the cleaning we typically do, the frequency and the intensity with which we clean. Transportation, it's a concern on the part of parents. It's a concern on the part of Barb. I'm really nervous about kids getting on buses, and we haven't quite solved that yet, other than we've got lots of parents and students who are willing to drive their children to school. But kids on buses can be really a tricky situation when you want to avoid that close contact. We're thinking about some support personnel on buses to assist the driver in overseeing students. Students would be expected to wear masks on the buses, sit with their siblings, if they have one, on the bus, and just two to a seat. And that can be difficult, as we can all imagine, to enforce, particularly with some of our youngest students. The fifth, the concern that fell fifth in line, if you will, is that these parents have no concerns and they want their children back in school. And there is some concern being expressed about wearing masks. And I'm hearing a little bit of that too through some emails. So that's a question that some individuals have about their child being required to wear a mask. So when we administered this survey about 2 weeks ago, the question was, do you intend to send your child back? I've talked about this, 74% or so said yes. If you're running a traditional format, 74% of us believe we're ready to go. We're going to send our children back. Data have changed around the pandemic since the administration of this survey. I'd like to update the survey, and we're preparing to send another survey to our parents sometime after tomorrow night's community message to them. And here's the slide I was referencing. If we offered an entirely virtual option, would you take advantage of it? So 42% said yes, they would. Now, there seems to be some confusion in this question, so we want to clarify this question in an updated survey. However, there is a level of interest in a virtual option for students. And this is busing. So we did get a nice number of individuals, 49% said that they would be okay with their child riding a bus. And over here, 58% said they would be willing to drive their child to school or their children to school, as well as have their teenager drive to school. So this would be a big help at relieving the numbers on buses. And here's where we talk about the hybrid schedule, where we consider schedules for students. They alternate being on site in the building and off site, learning virtually. Would you be in favor? 63% or so said they would be in favor of a hybrid schedule. And then this gets into some of the specifics of the hybrid schedule for different levels. I wanted to mention that the data keep coming, and it's amazing how frequent the information about this pandemic changes and what we're learning about the virus. And in a study that was completed recently, this is presented by the Institute of Education Sciences, there were different scenarios for how to bring students back to school, and then the likelihood of positive cases or infections, and actually they use the benchmark of 5. And in these models down here, they're referencing a hybrid model. So you can see in the description here, it is supported in this study to reduce the number of students in our building at any one time, as would a hybrid model do, to avoid a high number of infections or to keep those infections at a lower number, if you will. And I know, and we've heard some of the conversation about COVID, there aren't a lot of children contracting COVID. In some cases, when children do contract it, they can get really sick. That multiple systems inflammation syndrome is a pretty scary situation connected to COVID-19. Very few children have actually contracted the virus and become symptomatic, or that very serious version of the disease. However, we're learning they pose a risk to others, and that's really the concern, bringing a whole lot of students together with a whole or a fairly large number of adults and spreading that virus within the school communities. So we know we need to physically distance or social distance, wear masks, we're checking on our ventilation systems, and thinking about how we get students outdoors as much as possible into the fresh air. And this statement, this summary slide, indicates schools will need effective remote learning strategies. We know we need to be ready to provide virtual learning experiences for our students, and really with very little time. So we're thinking strategically about how we help ourselves be prepared for that, particularly as we're getting closer to the end of July, when I would like to have a plan finalized so that our families can in turn begin to prepare for childcare, et cetera. And again, the largest reductions in spreading infections when you bring individuals together in a community setting is by dividing those people into smaller groups, which is again, that hybrid model we talked about, where we reduce the enrollment or the number of students in the building by at least half. This last slide just calls out some of the communication efforts on the part of me, as well as some of what happens next. As I mentioned, I would like to be able to have a plan for the school year finalized by the end of July. there are some districts around us that have sort of put their flag in the ground, so to speak, and declared we're doing either traditional or we're offering virtual. And I really haven't been ready, based upon the data, to declare with 100% certainty any one mode. We've certainly been leaning towards the hybrid as part of our task force conversations and administrative team discussions, even in some of the conversations I've had with certain staff, select staff, leadership staff. That hybrid seems to make a lot of sense. And last week I mentioned the idea of, what about a traditional for elementary and middle school students? Those elementary students, it's really hard for families to keep them at home. However, with the way we're observing the data and the risks to individuals with students being in that congregate setting along with our adults, I'm really moving away from the recommendation of a traditional mode for learning at any level and really focused on the hybrid and or the virtual. I know that even if we go out with a hybrid and prepare for that, some families will want that virtual option for their children. And we are preparing to be able to offer that. So right now we're sort of vacillating between those two as we think about what's happened in the past week. If you've paid attention to some of the data, there have been some serious increases, particularly in Florida and in other states where the requirements were relaxed. People have become relaxed. They've come together in larger congregate settings, and people are getting sick or testing positive and spreading that virus. So Texas is at a point where their infrastructure is stressed a bit. Cases are starting to go up in Pennsylvania a little bit, not nearly to the extent they are in those other states. Florida, Texas, and California, they're in a pretty serious situation. However, the data aren't moving in the right direction. And we're reading more about positive cases that are occurring when people come together in our school community. This has occurred, as well as in some other camps where children attended in Georgia and Missouri. So that's the behavior of this virus. If people come together, that virus will spread. And it's really then, it makes it very challenging to land on a very specific mode for engaging our school district in school students and staff when we know the behavior of the virus. So like I said, we're talking more about the hybrid versus the virtual. How about if I stop there and see if there are any questions? Do we have questions? Okay, Mrs. Smith has kindly shared some questions with me. Masks, accountability, can we wear face shields? Will these be provided? Yes, we will be providing masks. So we'll have some of the disposable masks as well as face shields for individuals. We are right now individuals to wear their own mask. They're certainly got from the lacrosse team or the hockey team, or that you made yourself or purchased somewhere. They're acceptable in the order that was presented by the Secretary of the Department of Health. We do have face shields and not Okay, sorry about that. I think I'm back. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. Oops.
Okay, can you, let me go back.
Okay, Mr. Ganesh is going to let me share the screen. And actually, we really don't need it as much now because we were pretty much done, so that's okay. So I won't share the screen right now. Okay, thank you. So I apologize for that. And certainly when something like that happens, it really helps me to understand some of the challenges that you have faced with teaching in a virtual environment. So I really appreciate all that you did during the spring and you're thinking about doing in the fall. So we were talking about special areas on carts at the elementary level, and the reason for that having come up is really around this idea that research is supporting a cohort model for elementary students and keeping them together as much as possible to sort of form a second family, if you will, so that they get used to the students that they're with and they're with those same students on a consistent basis. So that's the reason for this idea around special areas coming into the cohorts. However, I do recognize that's raised real concern for our special area teachers because now they're coming in contact with a lot of different students. Again, if we maintain that social distance and wear the mask, right now the research is indicating it offsets the mitigation of the virus. However, I'm well aware of that concern and the question on the part of our special area teachers. Cleaning of the classrooms right now, we're developing more specific protocols and we're going to attempt to clean classrooms midday when students are either out at recess. We don't think we'll be using a lot of lunchrooms. We're questioning that because of how we have to socially distance students in a lunchroom because they won't be wearing masks and eating at the same time. So the idea is that we would shift around some of our custodial staff, reinforce if we can on first shift, and more frequently wipe down high touch surfaces, doorknobs, and desk surfaces in other areas. And that will require a little more labor first shift than what we're used to. And we recognize that. And we're thinking about the staffing that actually is reasonable to have that get done, to have that work be accomplished. Bathrooms cleaned midday as well as at the end of the day. Substitutes is a really good question. I don't have a good answer to that because in a traditional model outside of a pandemic, we have real difficulty getting substitutes. In a pandemic situation, I would imagine it's going to be even more challenging. So that's a really important question and something we're thinking about. I don't know if there's a way we can incentivize our substitutes. However, we don't have a hard and fast answer to that. And all districts in Montgomery County are struggling with that same question because we all recognize the field has been depleted of substitutes. Students traveling out of state on educational trips, will they be denied? Right now, I'm thinking that's a really good question and something we need to seriously consider based upon the governor's order and directions. Kim, could you close that door, please? Thank you. But right now, we are being recommended not to come in contact with others if we've been on one of those, if we've been in one of those states on that list. And my recommendation would be that we would recommend against that student returning to school, or we would deny the trip. They would have to quarantine for 14 days in the event they go and then want to come back if we have kids in school. How will we support the mental health of staff? Okay, so this is an important question. There's been some wonderful conversation happening recently around an employee assistance program, and I feel really good about this because we haven't had one and we've been talking about getting one. Mr. Alabak has been working on this actually earlier in the school year, figuring out how we can subscribe to an employee assistance program, which would offer our employees resources to support their mental health and social emotional health as part of that. And our board talked a little bit about that in its policy committee or finance committee. I'm sorry, finance policy. Thank you. It was policy committee. Thank you. And then Mrs. Smith presented that as part of grant money allocations last week. So planning to take the step in that direction. Could we offer childcare? Funny you should ask. We were talking about that this morning. I've been brainstorming ways that if we are in a hybrid or if we are really in a virtual model, is it possible to use our buildings in some way to offer childcare, and who might oversee that? So we're having some conversations with the Ys that currently offer before school and after school care, and trying to learn a little bit more from them about what might be possible. But yes, we're looking into the possibility of offering childcare in the event we're fully virtual, especially. Special education is an area where there's a lot of questions, and we know some students are really having a difficult time in that virtual setting. That's taken time to acclimate to, and for us to figure out how we most effectively connect to our special education students, our students that struggle with learning via a virtual mode. So we're working on more teleservices and tele-instruction and figuring out how we also tap into their social and emotional health. And along the lines of offering special ed services, if they're not in person, which if we go virtual, maybe special ed students, high-risk students come on site to receive their education. If we go hybrid, maybe special education students, high-risk students come on site more often. Because again, we don't want the gaps to widen, and we also want to address their mental health needs in the ways that we're used to addressing their mental health needs if we have those resources available. So special ed is certainly an area of focus, and the special ed team is thinking carefully about the what ifs connected to those different modes of instruction. I just want to emphasize, when it comes to social and emotional learning for all kids, this is something where it's all hands on deck. So as a science teacher, I want to take a few minutes to connect with my students on a regular basis, because they've been without that social interaction, at least many of them have. And they've been a part of a really different way of engaging in school and with their schoolmates. So we want to focus in the upcoming year, no matter which mode we're employing to instruct our students, we want to engage in some social and emotional connecting with our kids, maybe at the start of each lesson. But we'll talk more about that. It's blinking bright on the radar screen. The concerns with the hybrid, the double work and the planning. So if we're in a hybrid model, I'm planning for on-site instruction, that traditional way of delivering instruction, excuse me. I'm also planning for virtual instruction, and that can be challenging. And we're trying to tease out some possibilities to kind of decrease that, that double work and figure out how we can be most efficient. Again, I don't have a good answer, but it's definitely something our curriculum team is working on and trying to figure out so that it's more reasonable for our staff. Lunches, how will this look? There have been suggestions in publications we're reading that maybe students eat in their classrooms, maintain that cohort model at the elementary level, maybe even at the middle level. It may or may not work across a high school level within a hybrid model and having some students on site. But we have to think more about that, because we need individuals to oversee lunches, and teachers, they also need lunch. So they're delivering instruction to their students, and they're entitled to a 30-minute lunch each day. So we're figuring out what might work best. It's another advantage of the hybrid. If we decrease the number of students to half, it may be that we can use the cafeteria and socially distance our students and run lunch, for example, in the elementary schools in the ways that we're used to. Middle schools is going to be close, so we may have to make some additional accommodations to decrease the number of students so we can socially distance while kids are eating. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about with respect to lunch. What are the options for leaves for staff if they become ill? And it takes 2 to 7 days right now for test results, 14-day quarantine, could amount to 3 weeks out. So those are really good questions, which is why I've invited Mr. Alabak. So I'm hoping that he can speak to those a little bit and just give you a general summary about some of the leave options we have available to us.
Well, FAQs were shared about the different kinds of leaves. There is the new federal FFCRA, which does allow 2 weeks of full pay, which doesn't touch your sick days, and then up to 10 weeks at 2/3 pay if you have to be out for a COVID reason. There's also an FMLA provision. So anyone can request an FMLA instead of the FFCRA if that's more beneficial to you based on pay. Still the same 12 weeks that you could get, but each circumstance is going to be a little bit different for everybody, and that's going to be one of the challenges, to determine what is best for you in order to meet the demands of what you need to do from your family.
Other questions around the information regarding leaves? Other questions, Mrs. Smith?
Yeah, I think if we could elaborate on teachers seem concerned about their own family schedule, they attend a different district, or even if they attend here and it doesn't align with their teaching schedule, will they be forced to, or feel that that is their only option, to take a leave of absence? How will they balance that? Seems to be a lot of questions.
Did you hear that, Mr. Alabak?
Barely. I can barely hear Lori.
So the question really is around different schedules for us, hybrid or virtual, and childcare issues on a personal level. And how do we balance that? Do I have that right, Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
What are the opportunities to support situations that really challenge our staff, who are also parents and have children in other districts that may or may not be attending school?
Well, the FFCRA does allow for childcare concerns. FMLA does not, but FFCRA is only for 12 weeks. So it is a challenge to know what to do after 12 weeks are up, even if one qualifies for something like that. So that's a big unknown for all of us at this point. So I don't have a firm answer other than FFCRA, you're covered, but then what is probably the question, which we don't really have an answer to at this point.
And Mr. Alabak, if I understand correctly, FFCRA expires December 31st, 2020?
That's another challenge. Unless the federal government's going to extend that, it does sunset on 12/31. I mean, it helps for the start of school, but it wouldn't help much, if something happens in the middle of school the way it did this year, unless the federal government's going to step in again and reinstate that. Again, a lot of unknowns.
Yeah. So the hybrid impact to co-curriculars and athletics, I can start with athletics. That'll be driven by PIAA, and I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I'm not sure about co-curriculars. I know that some things were canceled in the spring, and I don't know about some of the other co-curricular activities we lead students in and whether or not they'll make sense to run this year. And I don't know, Mr. Alabak, if you have anything else you would add to that. The question is really around a hybrid schedule's impact to co-curriculars and or athletics.
I don't have a firm answer, but I believe we'd accommodate as best we can to do that from an absence standpoint. We've tried to do that in the past.
The hybrid will also require students find a way back to school if athletics do run, if PIAA athletics do run, and that's that could be a real challenge for families, and maybe that's part of what's in this question as well. Some co-curriculars may or may not, I think the jury's out on that right now. But we would certainly want to be as close to normal as we could be, even with a hybrid. Athletics, we don't have a lot of control over. That's driven by PIAA. Co-curriculars, I would imagine we will continue with the ones that we know really engage our kids in school and that are doable during a pandemic. But there's probably more specifics around some of the different ones that I would need to look at to be able to answer that question more concretely. Will staff be informed of if somebody tests COVID positive? So this is where I'm going to call on Meg Lewis, if I can, and see if she'll speak. And I think Mr. Ganesh was going to make her a panelist if she's not. Oh, yeah, there she is. That's great. Meg is my go-to. All right, Meg. So how are we going to deal with a staff member that's tested positive?
So an important part of this is, you spoke earlier about that cohort and to be able to do that contact tracing. So I know sometimes in the past, teachers may have felt that information wasn't shared or parents weren't shared. This is a whole different ballgame with COVID, and we need to be as honest and open and as transparent as possible to keep the entire community safe. But you know, we'll have the cohorts hopefully, and then even just a sheet at everyone's classroom door. Anyone who comes into that classroom will have to sign in, so that if in the event the teacher or a student has been exposed or test positive, we'll be able to do that contact tracing with the help of the Office of Public Health, of course.
So in the end, we would let our school communities know that somebody was positive in the school community at large. Is that right, Meg?
We would certainly do that, and you know, mindful of HIPAA and FERPA and privacy laws, but we would certainly make the community aware.
Yeah, okay, great, very good. Okay, so I just was checking through my questions to see if there were any others related to the medical. Will staff still be evaluated with Danielson? That would be, unless the state changes the evaluation system, we would continue to use Danielson, and certainly have lots of conversations about how observations and noticings and wonderings would look and sound different in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment. But we'll work with our principals on the conversations that they'll end up leading with their staffs. But yes, right now, as of today, and the evaluation system in place at the state level, it would be based on Danielson. And how does tech work in any of these models? So Mr. Ganesh is on the line too. So I'm not.
Tech school.
Oh, tech school. Oh, I'm sorry.
My
Okay,
mistake.
I'm sorry. Right now, tech school is planning to bring back students full-time, you know, regular setting. So we would be busing students to tech school regularly, as we were doing in March. That right now is the tech school's plan, while maintaining social distance, wearing masks, frequent hand washing, etc. What do teachers do when their teaching schedule does not align with their child's school? Okay, so we talked about that, thank you. And how will we get supplies to students, such as new consumables and art supplies, etc.? So the supplies question is something we've really just started to talk about. And that also is a challenging situation, because in a hybrid or in a virtual, it's going to be a very different supply system than the one that we're used to. And what we want to do to the greatest extent possible is personalize the supplies students have. So they won't be using lockers. That's sort of recommended in the publications. We will have our water fountains turned off, so they'll need their own water bottles, or we'll set up some water coolers with disposable cups, and they'll have the things that they need for school in their backpack, and primarily through the Chromebook or the device that they've been assigned. But those supplies, as we get down to some of the details, for example, in art class is a really difficult one. And we don't have a complete answer for how we would lead students in having their supplies or personalizing their supplies in an art class setting. So we need to talk that through more, and we need to think about that. But overarching goal is, to the degree possible, we personalize student items so that they're the only ones touching these things as much as possible. no sharing of food, their own water bottles, as I mentioned. Okay, other questions? Okay, Mrs. Smith has a few more. Thank you. Okay. Will staff have a choice for the mode of teaching? Yeah, that's a tough one too. I think we've been wondering about this, and in some conversations with leadership teams, it is difficult. We have to figure out a system if there's going to be choice. I don't want to create any inequities is really why I'm hesitating. I'm worried about how sometimes a choice can lead to an inequity among our staff. So I don't know if we have other answers to that question, Laurie or Kim. You know, other than we sort of have to wait and see which mode we're going to land on. And again, I'm sort of leaning towards that hybrid after last week and or virtual. We have to see where parents are going to be and then how many people we might need in different settings. So again, chicken, egg, there's so many things that need to come together. But my overarching goal is to avoid any inequities among teachers so that somebody doesn't say, hey, Barb got to teach virtually, but Kim had to teach in the classroom and I wanted to teach virtual too, or Barb wanted to teach in the classroom. You know, how do we create a system, if there is one, that would provide equity in those decisions or to those decisions? It's not clean. In some cases of leaves, it's cleaner or it's clearer, because if someone's on a leave, they're not working. So if they're on quarantine, if I understand correctly, Mr. Alabak, if they're under quarantine for 14 days and can telework, there may be some way that we can engage them. Is that correct, Mr. Alabak?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. The other challenge from a health perspective, when we're thinking of choice, I did want to bring up that if someone in your family or if you are immunocompromised in any way, and no matter what option we choose, you know from your medical professionals that I can't put myself in that setting because of whatever medical reason, that's going to kind of put you in a bucket where you're either going to have to choose a leave option or work virtually if it's at all possible. And that's going to be another challenge in what we decide we want to do from a teaching and learning perspective. We have to have staff in order to do these things. So I just wanted to mention that before we, I don't want that to be an unknown out there. So that may dictate kind of where we're heading in a way.
So Mr. Alabak, while we have you, somebody's asked a question if FFCRA includes full benefits.
Yes, because you're still getting paid, we can take the benefit deduction. So your benefit would continue, under FFCRA.
Okay, great. And then the last question I have, I don't know if there are any more. Okay.
If you can repeat about masks then.
Oh,
When you cut
masks.
out and
Oh,
people
I'm
were-
sorry. Yeah,
there
I'll
was a
go
lot of
back to
comments,
masks then. But the last question on my list is, will staff be receiving updated laptops? And I believe we've ordered these for all staff. I don't know, Mr. Ganesh can chime in. I don't know, have they been ordered, Mr. Ganesh?
Yes, Dr. Russell, we have ordered about 330 laptops that's already been delivered, and we have another 120 that's going to be ordered shortly. So we expect to have new laptops for all staff in the new school year.
Okay, so we'll figure out a distribution system for staff that worked in a way, professional staff, excuse me, that worked in a way similar to how we deployed devices to students. We'll do that in a manner that's safe for everybody, social distancing and masks. So stay tuned. But that was absolutely a focus for us, for professional staff in the upcoming year, so that you have a device you can depend upon. Thanks, Mr. Ganesh.
And then similarly, there's a question about Chromebooks. Are we almost one-to-one everywhere? What are our plans for that?
Yeah, so Mr. Ganesh, can you talk a little bit about how we are with a device for every student in the district? or how close we are to that?
Okay. So as you guys know, we are 1-to-1 grades 6 through 12, and we are in the process of getting Chromebooks for the grade 5. So for the remaining grades K to 4, we are in the process of looking at refurbishing the senior devices that we got and also ordering some new devices. So we'll be very close to being 1-to-1 district wide. There'll still be there'll still be a shortage that we'll plan to address, but we will have enough devices for all the students that would need a device in the new school year.
Yeah, so we want to try and provide every student with a device to the extent possible. And for some of our students, that may be an older device, but should still be functional. So we're pretty close. Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. And let me go back to masks. And I'm not sure at what point I cut off what the question was. Could you remind me?
It was about accountability. Can students opt not to wear them? And then what's the accountability with that? There were some questions also about face shields. Is the district providing things? Must you wear both?
Yeah. So right now, what we would support is what's been handed down in the order from the Secretary of the Department of Health, Dr. Rachel Levine, and that is that students need to wear, and staff need to wear face coverings on a daily basis. And those primarily are the cloth masks that we see and all wear, or most of us anyway. And in addition, we have the plastic face shields for individuals who would be more comfortable wearing both. We also have them for some of our students who we know they would be supportive. Now, the challenge around masks is that individuals can opt out of wearing a mask, and there really is no authority to hold them accountable or to require them to wear the mask. So it is a challenging territory as we embark down that path of instituting masks while kids and staff are in school, in that we can't enforce it completely if somebody raises questions about it. Now, if somebody has a medical condition, absolutely, they can't wear a mask and they must maintain that social distance of 6 feet or more. However, there could be times when individuals will simply just want to opt out because they have different views on the effectiveness of masks. And right now, according to the order, we have to respect that. So somebody else just raised their hand, I think. Oh, there's a chat, I'm sorry. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Anything that I didn't cover that you're wondering about? And I want to be very upfront and transparent that I have attempted to take some time and be thoughtful about a final decision for how we're going to embark on school in the fall. Some districts around us have made the decision, we're going to go back traditional or we're going to offer virtual, and I'm not really ready for that. So my goal is that we have that firm plan by the end of the month about how we're going to instruct kids. We're pretty sure on how we're going to keep kids safe and healthy if they're in our buildings. And there's lots of information out there that helps us to know what we need to do, whether it's from the CDC or it's from the health agencies. How we instruct is a tougher question, and it continues to be dependent upon how these data change as our systems have opened up in the green and more cases are occurring. Anything else?
I think we hit the majority of the themes in the questions. We obviously didn't answer the 150 specific questions, but I think we can go through them and maybe put together an FAQ. Or
okay, we're happy to do that. We'll put together an FAQ for your reference for things that we missed. So anything else for the good of the group before we might go?
I was just wondering, do you want to help them understand what they could expect tonight? Like, is tonight's board meeting, are they going to hear something different than today? Or, because I know a lot of them have been tuning in because the plan is going to be released.
Yeah, I think there are some questions on the part of some of our board members about that plan that's due to PDE. And again, for some reason, I was under the impression last week we had to have it approved by the end of July. And according to Mr. Subers, our solicitor, we do not. So tonight, my goal is to help clarify the purpose of that plan that goes to PDE, and that we will continue to think carefully about how we want to instruct the how of delivering our service to students in the next 2 weeks. So the plan, again, really focuses on how to keep a school community safe and healthy? What are the guidelines that we will uphold? And I'm going to explain that to the board. There's a set of FAQs posted there that also attempts to articulate the purpose of that PDE plan versus the other half of the plan, which is a big half of the plan, where we have to figure out how are we going to instruct kids in the fall. And again, we go back to those three modes: traditional, hybrid, or virtual. And as we learn more, that traditional seems more and more difficult to actually put into place. Having kids on site is a real possibility. We need to be careful about the number of students on site at any one time, which is what the hybrid affords us. And then of course there is that virtual. So I'll be talking about some of the same things that we discussed here as they connect to that PDE plan and then take us to that other plan we're really all interested in: teaching and learning. Anything else? Okay. So I certainly am happy to entertain any questions you might share as follow-up, and meet again, try and keep the communication ongoing. I am attempting to meet with PBEA leadership once a week, and happy to take questions or field them in between. I want you to feel well informed and as if you can pose those questions and then get some responses. And I know that some of you emailed me and I didn't get back to you yet. I am working my way through those messages. I hope I addressed some of your questions today. And if not, I'll be certain to respond to you. But thanks for tuning in, and stay well. Take care.